Kia ora tātou, my name is Colin McLeod. I'm the Director for the National Centre of Religious Studies, and it's my absolute pleasure to share with you the first session we have put together on Tātou Whakapono, Our Faith, the new religious education curriculum for Aotearoa New Zealand Catholic schools. We begin with the whakatoki, the prayer of this new curriculum, Tātou Whakapono, Our Faith. He honore, he kororia ki te atua, he mangarongo ki te whenua, he whakaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa. Honour and glory to God, peace upon the earth, and goodwill to all people. Okay, we're going to go back in time and fly through the history of the consultation that we've had thus far. Just to give you a context, it's absolutely critical in terms of this new curriculum that you have an awareness of where we've come, because the Tātou Whakapono, Our Faith, hasn't come from nowhere. When we first started talking with schools, we were conscious that there was a lot of joy and stress with religious education and Catholic character in schools. Some of that came from outside, the pressures from outside, and some was internal from the school community and teachers. We were aware that a lot of schools were thinking that strong social justice meant strong Catholic character, and as long as there was good academic excellence coming through, then the purpose of the school was being filled. And we challenged that a little bit, as did many of the teachers in the consultation, that Catholic schools must be more than what might be going on in a state school. We're very conscious that there's mutual support, and there's also isolation. Sometimes schools are really helping each other, sometimes staff are helping each other, sometimes people feel that they're actually quite alone. It's particularly complex when schools are in competition with one another for students. We're aware that there's a high teacher knowledge in many places, but there's also a lot of low teacher knowledge, that the capacity to teach religious education well is really challenging for teachers that don't actually know the material. And there's a lot of knowledge to actually be taught within the curriculum. It's not just about having a good faith background, though that's important, but it's about actually knowing what the Catholic Church teaches and the parts of the history and scripture. We're aware that there's high energy and no energy. Some were absolutely virtually burnt out. Remember, this was before COVID-19. So things were challenging even then, and we're conscious that it's become even more challenging now. We're also aware that many teachers have huge amount of high energy and put a lot of effort into quality religious education. We were conscious that grounded and searching leaders were in our schools. Some really knew what Catholic schools were about, some weren't sure and were finding their way. This isn't a judgment, this is just part of the reality that people were letting us know as we went around. And we were conscious that there was an open and a closed context. Some schools were very open to bringing in whānau, being aware of church, thinking about pedagogy and trying new pedagogical styles. Others were actually quite closed and were wanting to just stick to their knitting. We're aware that there are reasons behind all of these. The other thing that happened is that I used to go to, and still do, once a year, I talk with year 12 students. We call them inter-school Catholic yarns. Some of the things that they were saying is pretty profound. It's worth thinking about this summary from the last couple of years. Just want to draw attention to the fact that while these are year 12 students that are sharing this information, many of them talked about having come through Catholic primary schools and the impact that that had had on their lives and their faith journeys. This is also a range of students. They weren't necessarily kids that were committed to their Catholic faith. It's really interesting, and a range of cultures as well. It's really interesting what they actually chose to offer. So we know that there is a desire for quality religious education from the student body, and we certainly know from teachers that have told us again and again and again that they want quality religious education and support for quality religious education in their schools. So as we began thinking about what a new curriculum might be, and even if we needed a new curriculum, these were the things that came through. It's pretty old what we have and still pretty good. It's not particularly cohesive, particularly that there's no connection whatsoever between primary and secondary. And in fact, secondary schools developed a whole bridging set of materials that was to realign primary and secondary for the year 7s to 10s in particular. This new curriculum will mean that that won't have to happen anymore. We're very conscious that it's quite a crowded curriculum in both primary and secondary levels. There's a lot of AOs that need to be covered. There still are in the new curriculum, but it's a lot less than before and it's a lot more cohesive. NCEA dominates religious education in year 13 down to year 11, and we are really conscious that with the review of achievement standards taking place at the moment, we're not sure where this will land, but we want to create something that integrates well so that our young people can get their NCEA credits, but also that honours the teaching of the Catholic Church and the really quality learning that can take place that we think will be enjoyable and engaging for our young people. It's well resourced at the moment, what you have by NCRS, but need more. And we know that it's creatively adapted by dedicated principals, DRSs and RE teachers. By that, we mean that a lot of the materials are no longer what they were to start with. You have made them quite different. And in many cases, you've actually moved it beyond what the curriculum is asking for. So part of the new curriculum is to sort of make us come together a little bit more again, so that what's going on in Catholic schools throughout the country is really similar. Not necessarily the same, because we still need you to be creative and to adapt materials, but we need to be singing from the same song sheet. This particularly so in secondary schools, where entire units have been dropped from the original curriculum simply because there wasn't enough time, or because there wasn't the background information that teachers needed to teach it well. So young people, whānau parish schools, they have changed significantly. We know this. You've been telling us this for a long time. NCRS has been aware of it. We need a curriculum that actually acknowledges it. The idea of something being 20 years old isn't necessarily bad in itself. The fact that there's good content there, but it is dated. A lot of the terminology that's used is dated, and many of the resources are dated. So we produced the bridging documents that we put out in 2019, at the end of 2018, that schools have been using. And you'll notice there's a lot of synergy between what happens in those bridging documents and what is actually taking place in Tātou Whakapono, our faith. So we have very positive responses, particularly from primary. Secondary, not so much. We think they didn't engage with the documents because a lot of the DRSs we were talking to were saying, let's just wait for the new curriculum to come out. We're really positive about that process. We're not going to engage too much with the bridging document. Those that have engaged particularly with it, primary and secondary, you will find a lot of cohesion between the two in terms of the philosophy, the understanding of what religious education is, what we're about. There will be significantly different changes in terms of themes, cross themes, and touchstones. We'll talk about that later. So the new curriculum has to be, you have been telling us the whole way, cohesive and coherent. It's got to link together. It's got to have shared understandings. What the kids learn, what the teachers understand, what the bishops expect should be cohesive. It should be very similar. As I said, we should be singing from the same song sheet. It needs to be authentic to what the church teaches and authentic to who the young people in our classes are. The relevance is already there. It's just that young people often don't understand it. The things that young people are experiencing, the things they worry about, their concerns, the events that take place in their lives, the events that are happening in the world, the need for justice, etc., are already important to young people. We need to make sure that they are conscious that the church teaches some beautiful things about that. Calibrated to the important things, this is our summary of what people were saying, which means that, look, sometimes there are things that are focused on in a lot of detail that don't resonate with the kids because the kids don't see it as important. So what we've decided to do is be clever. For example, one of the foci on sacraments, where there was one sacrament per year in the primary program in particular, we're aiming at actually integrating that a lot more, so that in actual fact, the understanding of sacraments will be something that permeates a lot of the learning. Certainly a spotlight will go on individual sacraments from time to time, but we want something more than that. We want something that actually calibrates to the importance in people's lives, so that when they're actually feeling hurt, damaged, sorry, they can think about reconciliation as a sacrament and be able to express that to one another and to be able to forgive and receive forgiveness, those sorts of things. Flexibility with clear objectives means that you can take the AOs and you can move them around if you wish. In the new curriculum, we are expecting that you will have to cover all of the achievement objectives. But what people were telling us back in the day was that they needed some flexibility, that it wasn't a paint by numbers approach. Tātou Whakapono, our faith, is not a paint by numbers approach. And there are a whole lot of new emphases, particularly from Francis, in terms of mercy, in terms of Laudato Si and care for our environment, a personal call to holiness, those sorts of things. We have most certainly listened to you and we have brought those through into the new curriculum document. We began at Hiruharama in Jerusalem, up the Wanganui River. We felt it was important before we did any creative thinking whatsoever to ground ourselves in this land, to ground ourselves in a place that was important to Māori, to ground ourselves in Suzanne O'Bear in terms of her being a missionary to our country, to our nation, to the various peoples of this land. We think that Tātou Whakapono has a resonance with that because we too are missioning, sharing with you and teaching our young people what it is to be Catholic and what the Catholic Church teaches. This was the original group, Religious Education Advisors. Merv Duffy, Corty Wilson was with us and gave us a context of the land that we were on, and we began our very first brainstorming from this place. And we brought this home and we put it on the walls of the NCRS offices. We had post-it notes of little ideas that could happen. Could it be something that's focused around Eucharist? Could it be something that's focused around river? Could it be like a machine where one cog moves the other cog so that it's connected? Could church be its center? And could we drift out? All sorts of ideas we threw around and we put on this wall. And then we looked for examples of practice. And then we also established a mechanism by which we got as many questions as we could from young people. Many of you will remember this. We got 640 questions. Here they are up on the wall, where young people asked us all sorts of things. And we thought we need to get these sorts of questions into the context of the new curriculum. This was the poster that went up on the walls of those schools that participated. We unfortunately never got the names of the children. We would have loved to have answered many of their questions, but we didn't get the chance. Here's some of them. Again, it's clear that our young people have questions they want answered, and we need a curriculum that supports them in answering those. Don't you love these questions? From the child that's thinking, is God flooding the world now with all these floods that are happening and changes in the climate because we're not up to, what a fantastic question, to the year 9 that should know by now, because he certainly learned in primary school or somewhere else that the Bible wasn't found as a whole book. It was found, put together in pieces and became a library in itself. I love that the year 11 student thinks that there are schools, Catholic schools, where they don't have to do RE. The last one of this overpouring from a year 4. How does the Holy Spirit make you pray? How did God make the world? How did God make heaven? And what does it look like? And how does God follow us all the time? And how can God be inside our hearts? There's a reality that comes through from the voices of our rangatahi that's asking us to do our job well, not just for the bishops, not just for NCRS or even for our own school, but because our kids have these beautiful questions and we need a curriculum and we need the support resources that are going to help us to answer them for them. And of course, some questions are not easy to answer. We're aware of that too. I heard Bishop Barron speak at a conference a few years ago, and this has haunted me from that moment. It's not new. But if we don't provide the answers to our young people, they are going to find answers. They won't find them from good, solid sources often. They will find it from people that are just speaking out or have very different understandings. The reality for us is that our church teaches some beautiful things. We need to be able to package that, to be able to provide it in a context that's meaningful for our young people. And we need at least to provide them with our answers so that they can question those as they get older and work out whether or not they're going to be their answers too. Most certainly a journey. And one of the things that we highlight in Tātou Whakapono, our faith, is that context of Hikoi Wairoa, our spiritual journey. So the plan that we pitched in 2018, and when we spoke at the National Conference, Catholic Convention, we shared this with you. So 2017, we were sowing the seeds, we were pitching the idea, do we need a new curriculum to everybody? Everybody said yes. So we wrote from that the primary RE bridging document. Then 2018, we gathered the seed. We actually also wrote the secondary bridging document about 6 months later, because secondary too were asking for that. The very first seed, as I mentioned, was planted at Hiruharama. We spoke to lots of people. We talked all around the country and listened to what was happening. And we looked a bit at what was happening elsewhere. We looked at a lot of curricula from other countries to see what was happening in schools over there. And we looked at various pedagogy that was taking place. And there's a range of pedagogy, as you can imagine. And in Catholic contexts, some of these are quite traditional and others extremely creative. We wanted the opportunity for you to be able to make pedagogy choices that actually could be either of those. 2019, we began framing it all together, and we created the new model, the very skeleton of the themes, cross themes, and touchstones, which at that stage we didn't even have terminology for. We shared that along the way. And then in 2020, we began filling in all the detail. We were dialoguing with you, then of course COVID hit. And so we continued to dialogue, but we backed right off because some of you were saying, we're barely coping with what's going on. We haven't got time to get our heads in the space. So our plan at the time though, 2018, was to start setting things in place. And then in 2021, we wanted to get the curriculum out by the end of 2021. Interestingly, it was signed off in December of 2021. So even with COVID going on, we went too far behind the 8 ball. And then we were planning to share this bounty because there will always be a feedback loop that's going on. And we're absolutely confident and hopeful that the Spirit continues to work in this work that we are doing. And most of the slides in 2019, when I'd finish off with a presentation, I'd say, this is what's going on. The seeds are being sown. They're not NCRS's seeds. They're the seeds of the Holy Spirit, of Jesus, of God, our creative Father, working in this place. And there will be fruit. And the fruit was starting to come, but we didn't know what it would look like, really. We had a basic framework. This is where it ended at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. We had some fairly clear ideas about what the themes could be from the top down. We had some really strong ideas about what the terminology or what the areas would be for cross themes. Although you will notice in the new curriculum that the Māori terms for each of these areas have changed significantly because they needed to. What were originally transliterations have now become much more embedded into these understandings of grace, holiness, wisdom, justice, and prayer. That's for another time. Similarly, the touchstones became embedded. And while at one stage we were looking at getting rid of the touchstones because it seemed to add another level of complexity, the word from teachers again and again was no, keep them. They actually add something to what the whole curriculum is. We put out in 2020 a survey and we asked teachers, what do you think of the work we've done so far? Only if you want to answer. Remember, COVID was not far off had not far disappeared. Little did we know what was coming. Overwhelmingly positive. And we asked them about what they thought the effectiveness within the draft curriculum, how good that was. And as you can see, again, we got overwhelmingly positive responses. And those that were generous enough to offer some criticism, we were able to incorporate that into subsequent drafts. There were 18 different drafts of this curriculum in its journey. And many of you will remember most recently that I went to every single diocese and I spoke with vicars and managers for education and a range of all sorts of people and the bishops. This is what we were pitching. That the programs are good and tired. There's a primary and a secondary curriculum, but they don't talk to each other. What if they become one? What if that curriculum goes from years 1 to 13, which we've never had? Levels 1 to 8, that's gone, of course, because the Ministry of Education is actually moving to phases of learning. So we have come up with new terminology for those. And if it was seamless, so that in actual fact, it just slotted together. And what if cluttered strands and topics became succinct, cohesive, and what if printed books became online resources? Because many of you are saying we don't want to buy printed books anymore. It's a cost we could do without. And in fact, if we can have some more dynamic resources that are digital, that would be the way to go. And we've included new emphases in the draft. Encounter, school and parish, just hinting at a better relationship being possible between school and parish in those places where it's not. The easy tracking is simply that all AOs will be covered, and Catholic social teaching gets a bigger emphasis. Catholic Church documents start to be included. The appropriate ones, we're not going to make this really heavy, but the ones that actually speak so beautifully into the space of religious education. And we're making sure that our religious education is connected to the lives of children in overt ways. This includes spirituality, personal call to holiness, children's role in the mission. And all of this falls out as tō Tātou Whakapono, our faith, not necessarily the faith that the children currently claim or their families currently claim, but the faith of the church that is being shared with them in the hope that it will become their faith too. So the structure of the draft curriculum was this in the bridging documents. And we pulled that through into the new curriculum, tō Tātou Whakapono, our faith, included two other key areas, RE in the New Zealand curriculum, and also all of the actual new framework in terms of achievement objectives and the likes. And that in turn became this document, which is approved by the bishops now and which you already have. So I want you to be really clear that we haven't just sat in our ivory tower and created this. We've had a huge amount of dialogue with people at the chalk face, these groups. We've spoken with primary advisors, and they've had a huge role in terms of writing the material, and secondary advisors too, actually putting their input into this from the things that you have said and shared with them. We've spoken with principals and DRSs in every single diocese in the country. Secondary principals have invited me to speak to them often and to be part of their national conference, and I spent significant time with them pitching what it was that we were trying to do, where we were heading, taking on their feedback. Similarly, the primary principals exec have invited me every year, once or twice, to speak with them and to get their feedback as well. There was a group of primary teachers that were looking at being really creative in terms of integration and the likes. They called themselves Primary Authentic Context for Learning Group. I spent quite a bit of time with them in a meeting in Nelson at one stage. And since the 75 principals and teachers were those that actually responded to survey questions that I'd put out when I was actually saying, please only do this if you have energy for it. And many individual DRSs have given feedback, and some have written quite a lot of material. In addition, the New Zealand Catholic bishops have had a lot of input and have asked a lot of questions. The Te Kupinga leadership team have seen and responded. Merv Duffy is our theological advisor. He's read it absolutely in depth and minutiae and commented that it's an extremely good document. And he's the one who actually gives it the nihil obstat, which means that the bishops can then give it an imprimatur. Te Hokai Nuku have been our formal Māori consultation group. We've also had a community reference group, which involves people from a range of cultures that we've met regularly with, that have read it and given input on things. And in addition to those groups, Graham McKinstry works for Core Ed. We wanted to have a decent conversation around where we were heading in terms of the document and whether it meshed with what was current teaching practice. He was very affirming. Similarly, a range of people, when we've gone around, I've been particularly noticing and taking on board conversations I've had with people of all sorts of different cultures, teachers at the chalk face, that have come up and just made comment, asked questions, and mostly to being affirming of where it was that we were going. Finally, I just want to go through the timeline. This is what we've done so far. We wanted to launch it this year at the Catholic Convention, but of course that has been postponed to 2023. So we've put the curriculum out so that teachers can have it, that you can look at it, but we're not actually encouraging you to start teaching from it. You need and deserve more support from NCRS than that. But one of the things that we heard throughout the entire consultation was that there wasn't enough time for people to get on board with a lot of what the Ministry of Education is doing. There hasn't been enough time. What you need is time to come to terms with a new document, a new curriculum. We're very aware of that at NCRS. You have time. So our plan now is we are researching and writing a range of materials at PL4, PL51. 5.1 refers to NCA level 1.5. So we've written that level 1 material, but we're not sure where that's going to land because NZQ are continuing to change what they're expecting for NCA. We're not going to change everything, but we may need to tweak an AO here and there to actually make it more cohesive. And right at the moment, the team is writing year 9 and 10 material. So we've got 2 people working on that so that we can get that material out hopefully this year. will be finished by the end of this year. Because there's only one person writing at PL1, it's taking a little longer. We're also looking at designing the new website, and we're actually planning for 23 and 24 to prepare materials at this level, so that by the end of 2024, there will be a whole range of material that's complete. We're pushing for full implementation. This is at beginning of 2024, because that is when NZQA will be expecting all schools, secondary schools, to be using the new achievement standards. So it makes absolute sense, and it would be crazy not to be using the new curriculum at that time. We're going to carry on writing, and schools by the beginning of 2025 will be expected to be using the new curriculum. That's why we're encouraging in most of our correspondence that schools start planning to pick up the new curriculum in 2024. You can pilot the materials, get your heads around the space, maybe merge some in the new and the old, although that's going to be difficult, but that by 2025. And we're planning for a rollout as what happened in the past. We are extremely conscious that many schools will be wanting to pick up all of the material for the whole school in the same year. That's a school choice. And it may be that we don't have all the resources in place, but our feedback from schools thus far is that you're okay with that. As long as the materials are coming, you can manage yourself how it actually is rolled out in the school. We're still developing the site. The site's a wee way off being finished in terms of design. And what we're going to do in the meantime is populate folders inside Microsoft SharePoint so that you can actually access material, even though it's not in a nice website version. You'll be able to get the material that's finished and be able to use that as you see fit. And once all of the material is rolling, NCRS will continue the journey. We're hoping that we will come back, look at all the materials and be able to make changes, develop ESOL extension enrichment materials, pick up different topics, change the emphasis on things. This is all about time. We would love to be doing all of this at once, but we're quite a small team. There's only about 4.5 of us working on this. And the reality is it takes time to do this well. You need to do a lot of reading and a lot of background. We want to do this well for the teachers, for the young people in our schools. So there's no rush, but we want you to get on board. Finally, I just want to thank you. Thank you for the work that you do, for your commitment to Catholic education in our schools, for your work in religious education and your creativity. Thank you for what you do for the rangatahi in our schools. They need you so much, and we know that it's an exciting journey when things are working well, and we're hoping that your sense of Tātou Whakapono, our faith, is that it's going to be wonderful when it lands at your place, because that's why we've done it. Not to dump a whole lot of extra work on you, but to help you as teachers, to help the young people in your care. It's a privilege to do this work. Please keep an eye on our website, as we will put things up there from time to time, including links to videos such as this as we make them. God bless you.